So here is the excellent Pixeltown 2 by AgentCNF. It's sort of a simple city simulator. Let's take a look. So there are 16 plots here. You can select a plot, it brings up a menu, different buildings you can put on that plot based on how much money you have. So there we go, we've got the building on there, we have our score increased, and we have our money ticking up based on the value of that building. Great, let's take a look inside. So looking inside, we see we have 16 sprites, one for each of those plots. Let's take a look at the differences are between those. Just going to clean it up a little bit. So if we go back and forth, we see there's actually very little that has changed. There's the message number, and then there's that building on variable. Changes based on the number of the spot. This looks like an ideal candidate for creating clones. So let's get started with that. We're going to create a duplicate. So here we are. Now the first thing I like to do whenever I create a sprite is create a little comment that talks about what that sprite is and if there are action items that need to happen on that. So we're going to create clones of this to represent our map. So how many clones do I need to create? Well, you might think off the top of your head that it's 16, but actually we only need to create 15 clones because we have the original sprite, which is identical to the other clones. So we only have to create 15. We want to make sure they're in the right place. Then we're going to handle the build message and then the click handler. Okay, let's start with the clone. Here in control, we have create clone of myself. We've already said we have to create 15 of them, so we're going to repeat that 15 times. Now when you create a clone, all local variables and costumes and sounds get copied along with it. It is a clone of everything that's in there. So to make them different, we're going to create some local variables, make a variable for this sprite only, that distinguish it. We're going to make an ID, a row, and a column. So before we start creating clones, let's make sure we set those up to be the right values. And they will all start at 1. But if we create the clones now, they will all have the value 1, so we want to make sure we change that. So after we create the clone, we'll update the ID, we'll update the row, and then if the row is greater than 4, we'll change the column and reset the row. Great! So we're now going to create 16 clones. So let's also make sure we've got the right costume on. The problem here is that they're all going to be in the same place. Sometimes with a clone you'll go to another sprite, or you'll have some other table of where they are. We can actually calculate these to make them look like the original. I've done the calculation already, so I'm just going to copy it in here. Alright, so this code will create our sprites, place them in the right place, and they will all have their own unique ID. Let's check it out. Okay, well that seemed to have worked. So let's do a little bit more. We're going to create a block to encapsulate that building of clones. And we're going to run it without screen refresh so that we don't have to see them being built. And here we go. All right, there we go. There are 16 plots. Now we need to actually do something useful with those plots. need to handle the build message and the click handler. Let's look at the click first. So when we click one of these plots, what that does is tell the building buttons which plot I'm currently working on. So in this case it says 1 here, and each of the 16 plot sprites change that number to something else. Well, we have a built-in value for that right now, which is our ID. So we're going to set building on to ID. Should take care of that one. And that will handle the click. The other thing we have to deal with is this message here. Right now this says build 1. There was also build 2, build 3, etc. We're going to change this to a single message, and we'll say plot build. And the same thing here, we check to see if we are the sprite that we're being built on. So we're just going to do that now with the ID. Last thing we need to do is make sure that this all gets set up when the green arrow is clicked. For the moment, I'm going to ignore the layering. You don't usually need to do layering unless you've really got things going on top of each other. In this one, we don't see a lot of that. We may have to fix that later, but for the moment, I'm going to get rid of that. The other thing is that each forever loop adds to your lag. Now, this is a fairly simple forever loop, so it's not going to add a ton of lag, but it's always better in a clone to try to remove forever loops. And in this case, it should be fairly simple, because since this is just changing the show hide value based on the backdrop, we actually have an event that we can look at to do that specifically. So when the backdrop switches to town, we're going to show it, and when the backdrop switches to build, we're going to hide it. So the last thing we have to do is make sure the buttons know about this new scheme we have with the plot. And in fact, it's going to be really nice because here you can see we had to have a separate if then else for each plot. We don't need to do that anymore because we have the building on set. Now we can just call our new message plot build. Simple as that. And now we'll do it for all the other buttons. Lastly, we'll get rid of all the old sprites. Let's try it out. Here we go. And when we hit stop, all the clones get deleted. The thing I like to do with my clones is finding a way to get information about each clone. So I'll usually create a speak event, plot speak, that I can look at to say interesting things. So for instance, I'll do say ID. Now if I give it the plot speak command, shows all the ID numbers. You can have it say other things, other interesting things. When you have a lot of clones floating around, sometimes it's good to know which is which. In the next tutorial, we'll talk about the build buttons and how to share data between clones.